The applause washed over the studio in steady waves as Jelly Roll walked out, bigger than life both in presence and energy, offering a modest wave that felt more like gratitude than performance. He settled into his chair with a small exhale, adjusting himself at the table as the cameras found their angles. The view set gleamed under the lights, polished and inviting, but beneath that shine there was already a hum of anticipation. This wasn't just another pop interview. Everyone could feel it. Whoopi's introduction was generous, almost reverent. She spoke about redemption, about second chances, about how Jelly Roll's music had reached people who rarely saw themselves reflected on daytime television. As she talked, Jelly Roll nodded, eyes lowered at times, hands folded together like he was grounding himself. When she finished, he thanked her sincerely, his voice warm and steady, telling her how much it meant to be welcomed without judgment. The audience responded immediately, applause swelling again, some people standing. Joy Behar leaned forward next, her expression curious but edged with something sharper. She smiled as she spoke, but it was the kind of smile that signaled a pivot. She asked whether Jelly Roll worried that audiences connected more to his backstory than to his music, whether his past had become the headline rather than his present work. Jelly Roll laughed softly, not offended yet, saying he'd spent most of his life being ignored, so he wasn't about to complain now. He added that if his story opened the door for the music, he was okay walking through it either way. The crowd chuckled along with him, the exchange still light, still safe. Jelly Roll relaxed slightly, shoulders dropping, thinking the tone had settled. But Joy tilted her head and continued, her voice firmer now. She suggested that America loved comeback stories almost too much, that struggle itself had become a kind of currency. She wondered aloud whether there was a danger in rewarding pain with attention. The word, rewarding, lingered in the air longer than intended. Jelly Roll's smile thinned, just a fraction. He shifted in his chair, clasping his hands tighter, but he answered calmly. He said pain wasn't something anyone chose for attention, and that telling the truth about where you came from wasn't the same as selling it. He explained that his music came from lived experience, not strategy, and that if people found hope in that honesty, he wasn't going to apologize for it. Joy interjected before he could finish, questioning whether constantly revisiting darkness kept people stuck in it. She joked lightly about everyone having a tragic origin story these days, glancing toward the audience for a laugh. Some people laughed, others didn't. The sound was uneven, uncertain. Jelly Roll stopped mid-thought. He looked at Joy, then at Whoopi, then briefly out toward the audience, as if recalibrating the room. When he spoke again, his voice was slower, more deliberate. He said talking about pain didn't trap people in it, it reminded them they weren't alone. He said silence was what kept people stuck. His words were measured, but there was a new weight behind them. Joy waved a hand dismissively, saying she wasn't minimizing anything, just challenging the narrative. She said personal responsibility mattered too, and that not every hardship needed a spotlight. The interruption came fast, cutting across Jelly Roll's sentence without pause. The shift was palpable. Jelly Roll leaned back slightly, jaw tightening, eyes narrowing not in anger, but focus. Joy broke the tension with a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said Jelly Roll was clearly passionate, but maybe a little too sensitive for a morning talk show built on debate. The word, sensitive, hung in the air, heavier than she likely intended. Jelly Roll stared at her for a beat, breathing slow and deep, as if deciding whether to let it pass. He didn't. He leaned forward again, voice rising just enough to cut through the studio without becoming a shout. He said sensitivity was what kept people alive when everything else failed them. He said it was sensitivity that made someone pick up the phone instead of a bottle, sensitivity that made someone tell the truth instead of bury it. His hands moved as he spoke, not wildly, but with emphasis, palms open like he was laying his life on the table. The audience reacted instantly, applause, a few gasps, heads nodding. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to slow the momentum, saying everyone needed to take a breath. Jelly Roll nodded at her briefly, acknowledging the attempt, but his eyes went right back to Joy. He said he didn't come there looking for a fight, but he wasn't going to sit quietly while his life and the lives of people he loved were treated like abstract debate points. Joy fired back that no one was attacking his life, that questioning narratives was part of healthy discussion. Her tone sharpened, defensive now. She said if guests couldn't handle pushback, maybe live television wasn't the right place for them. A few members of the audience murmured in agreement, but they were drowned out by louder applause on the other side. Jelly Roll nodded once, sharply. He said pushback was fair. He said disagreement was fair. But he said being talked over, joked about, and reduced to a stereotype was something he'd dealt with since he was a kid, and he wasn't accepting it anymore. His voice cracked just slightly, not with loss of control, but with the effort of holding it together. He talked about friends who never got clean, who never made it to a couch like this, whose stories ended in alleys and hospital rooms. He said those people didn't get platforms or applause, just silence. As he spoke, the studio fell completely still. Even Joy seemed to hesitate, her usual quick retort slowing as the weight of his words settled in. Whoopi tried again to redirect, suggesting they move to another question, another topic. But Jelly Roll shook his head gently. He said sometimes you didn't move on because moving on was how things stayed broken. He said he understood this was television, but he was still a human being sitting there, not a character in a segment. Joy sighed audibly and said the show couldn't grind to a halt every time emotions ran high. That did it. Jelly Roll straightened fully in his chair, his presence suddenly towering. His voice didn't explode, it hardened, steady and unmistakable. He said emotions weren't the problem. Lack of empathy was. He said when you invite someone on to talk about their life, you don't get to mock the parts that make you uncomfortable. The audience erupted, applause crashing through the studio like a wave. Some people stood, others clutched their chests or covered their mouths. Producers could be seen at the edge of the set, whispering urgently. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Jelly Roll continued, his words now unstoppable. He said he'd spent years learning how to speak instead of scream, how to feel instead of numb out. He said walking away from disrespect was part of that growth. Then, calmly, deliberately, he reached up and unclipped his microphone. The small metallic click echoed louder than expected, a sound that seemed to freeze time. He placed the microphone on the table and stood. The movement drew a collective gasp from the audience. Jelly Roll looked at Whoopi and thanked her sincerely for the invitation and for the respect she'd shown him. He thanked the audience for listening, for hearing him out. Then he looked back at Joy and said, without anger but without softness, that some lives weren't punchlines, and some pain wasn't up for debate. With that, he turned and walked off the set. The applause followed him, loud and emotional, mixed with stunned silence. Joy sat rigid in her chair, lips pressed together, eyes forward. Whoopi exhaled deeply, shaking her head, clearly frustrated, not just with the clash, but with how far it had gone. The camera lingered on the empty chair Jelly Roll had left behind before cutting to commercial. Backstage was chaos. Producers rushed to smooth things over, voices overlapping, phones already buzzing with alerts. Jelly Roll walked quickly down the hallway, his face set, jaw tight. A staffer asked if he was okay. He nodded once, not slowing, not looking back. When he reached his dressing room, he paused, hands braced on the doorframe, breathing deeply until the adrenaline ebbed. Inside, the silence was stark. He sat down heavily, rubbing his face with both hands. There was no regret in his expression, only exhaustion and resolve. He knew exactly how this would play out. Clips would be shared, headlines written, sides taken. He'd be praised as brave by some, criticized as reactive by others. He accepted that. What he wouldn't accept was sitting quietly while his humanity was diminished. On set, the show resumed awkwardly after the break. Whoopi addressed the audience with careful neutrality, acknowledging that emotions had run high. Joy offered a brief, clipped comment about spirited debate being part of the show, but her usual confidence was muted. The segment ended, but the tension lingered, thick and unresolved. By the time Jelly Roll left the building, the moment had already escaped the studio. Social media was on fire, videos spreading at lightning speed. Fans flooded his pages with messages of support, thanking him for saying what they'd never been able to articulate. Critics accused him of overreacting, of misunderstanding the format. Jelly Roll didn't respond to any of it.